Hey, good morning, Grace Community Church family. Pastor Corey here, joined with Pastor Jeff or Jeffrey Dueck, who's our worship pastor. And so thanks for being here, Jeff.
Great to be here.
Just to get us started, we're going to do a little Q&A, and we're going to get to chat a little bit more about this message. So if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We have some of our moderators and our hosts who are looking through, and they're sending them my way. So we'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can. I just did want to take a minute and acknowledge the 11 people who raised their hand digitally and decided to follow Jesus for the first time this morning. What an awesome thing that we get to do and celebrate together, even just through the internet. So it's kind of cool to see what God is doing. Pastor Jeff, you want to introduce yourself a little bit and kind of just welcome everybody, say hello?
Sure. I rushed over to my computer from a time of worship, and it's so great to be here with everybody. And while we are at home, we can still be together. So it's pretty cool. So I help lead our teams, worship, creatives, and work with Pastor Mike Jones and a great group of leaders for creativity, music, work times of worship on the weekends across our campuses, and now here online. As we're in this kind of new paradigm, but it's really the joy to be a part of what God's doing at Grace Community Church, and been here about 10 years now, going on 10 years this fall. Wow. It's pretty crazy.
That's crazy. It's a
time flies.
That's really cool. Well, we'll jump right in. There's some questions that already came through, and I see some more that are coming in through now. So we'll kind of just start off talking about endurance and trust, as we kind of this will kind of wrap up the whole QuaranTeam. So you might even have to touch on all the topics. But first question's from Becky, and it says, how does someone begin to lead with trust in their home? So how does someone begin to lead with trust in their home?
Yeah, I was struck by that moment in the sermon where Pastor Jared was comparing love to things like, I'm looking at my notes, things like the foundation, like a rock, right? And not a plastic chair that would break under you, or a roof, or these really solid structures, right, that he talked about. And it dawned on me that I love this question because it says to begin to lead with trust. I think you got to build it up, right? Any kind of strength in your life, even physical strength, if you're working out at home right now, or strength
or not,
trust, or not. But like any kind of strength takes time. You're not born strong, right? You're born with muscles, even as a baby. But I was thinking of a friend who has a newborn baby just this past weekend, and another who's got a less than 1 year old. And there's this like timeline, right? Of eventually you get some tummy time for the baby, and they can build their core. I got to go back to some of that, I think, to build my core. But tummy time, and then because strength takes time to build, and you have to start somewhere, even in small ways. But I think there's often catastrophe when you haven't been building strength, and then the moment calls on you to have strength, and you haven't been putting in the work, you haven't been developing it. So I think it's actually a great question to say, begin to lead with trust in their home. I think you got to start with small steps. I think you have to, we say trust is earned. I think that's true in a loving relationship. Hopefully there is some, some give and take, and some hope in that trust building process. So it's not like, I'll trust you in a year from now. But at the same time, it has to be small ways every day. It's got to be built up over time. And I think our expectations are probably off when we have these big reliances on trust, but we haven't been building it up over time in a pattern, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's great. That's a really good answer. When I think about leading with trust, and there was a phrase you said, trust is
tummy time. Was tummy time the phrase?
Tummy time. These are actually, you thought it was Q&A, but it's really pro fitness tips from Pastor Jeff. No, there's a phrase about trust that Pastor Craig Rochelle from Life Church talks about. He talks about trust is given, not earned. And when I think about trust, something that we practice in our home is we talk about trying to change the paradigm to be trying to change trust from a works-based endeavor to a love-based one.
Right.
So like there's that, because I hear you saying that same thing. It's like you build up trust with acts of love and kindness towards each other. That's how it builds.
Right.
It's not something that you earn like tickets. It's an intimate, it's a trust, it's an act of love when you build trust with each other.
Yeah.
So, but defaulting towards giving trust versus defaulting to keeping lists of wrongs, and keeping and being like, oh, I can't trust that person. That's a difficult process to even begin. So starting with small steps feels like
it is.
Yeah,
And I
it just
think
feels like
even
the
what you
natural way.
said, the transparency and openness in like a conversation about it. Context is everything here. There's a reason why we're talking about QuaranTeam in terms of family. Like we're assuming that there's a commitment here between
Yep.
spouses and a family here. If you're entering a business venture with some stranger you've never talked to before, you're going to have a lot different. You're going to have skepticism towards the person. You're going to have very careful criteria to meet before you do. But a reminder, even on a daily basis, of the vow you've taken, of the family that you are, of what Christ has done. I mean, we're not just offering self-help here either. We're talking about Christianity. We're talking about Jesus and what he's done. So a reminder of what Jesus has done for us, for our family. That reminder of the rules of the game, in a sense, as a family, and the context of what Christ has done, super important, because that allows you to do the things Pastor Jared was talking about, affording some patience, affording some leeway, some grace towards people, because that's not natural. It's not necessarily what you would do in some business arrangement or something. The family unit and the Christian family unit, what God has done, I think we need to. I know I feel convicted about that. We need to have regular reminders and conversations about who we are in Christ, who we are as a family, so that then love and trust and hope and all these things get worked out in the right context, like the right ground rules that God wants for us.
It's like building rebuilding the sandbox. We talk about it a lot. It's like, well, I'm playing in somebody else's sandbox, but in our home, it's like this is like we're creating. This is our own sandbox. Let's talk about, what are the boundaries in our box, and what are the default language, what are some of the rules of the house, like those kinds of things that build trust. So having those kinds of honest conversations is really important. So I appreciate you leading us out there. I'm trying to check through the chat. Lots of hellos and what's ups. Everybody is so glad to see you. Got a question here from Daryl, and it actually kind of goes. There's another question from username Grateful, but so they kind of go together. So I'm going to read Grateful's question first, and I think it kind of leads into Daryl's question. So the question from Grateful was, when someone claims to be a godly man, yet nothing in their life seems to indicate a life submitted to Christ, do you continue to endure through the marriage? And then Daryl's question, so I think they kind of go really well together, was how long do you keep praying for a spouse or a family member?
Wow. Big questions there. So that first question goes back to what we were just saying about context, right? So man, I would think that in a marriage or in a family, if you don't share the most important, crucial thing in your life with another person, that's obviously going to cause a lot of conflict, right? If you don't not just say God's first, but if your priorities and your commitments and the effort that you're putting into the relationship isn't on the same ground rules as another person, obviously there's going to be tension and conflict, and endurance is going to be, man, we need endurance when we do share all the same values, let alone when we don't share all the same values and commitments. So, one aspect of that tough question from Grateful, I think is who it was, was not really just a marriage or a family question. It's, what if someone claims to be godly but isn't? man, I hope that you have a church family and relationships and a small group or a group of friends who can work with you and in accountability with him, or vice versa. If it's a husband, let's say, who's really following the Lord and praying for his family, but there's resistance with a spouse or with children who maybe have turned away. I think doing it solo is really tricky, and
Yeah.
spiritual accountability about following God is a tricky thing in a marriage or outside of a marriage, if someone claims to be a follower of Jesus. So, I think a vow is a vow, and apart from the breaking of that vow, in some really severe circumstances, I think you endure, like Pastor Jared talked about, and you try and reestablish that context that Pastor Corey and I were just talking about what do we believe? What do you really believe, and how can we live in line with that? Yes, there's ups and downs, but are we moving in the same direction? But it does tie in, I think, to what Daryl asked about perseverance. I think it's so important to remember that this is a spiritual battle. It's not just, I mean, we could just go get books off the self-help shelf well, we can't because we're stuck at home, but you know what I mean. We could go get we could order a bunch of books from Amazon about relationships and about strategies, and all that wisdom is good. I mean, there's plenty of good wisdom for how to get along and how to work through problems, but it's a spiritual issue deep down. And Jesus talked about how a lot of big things only happen through prayer and through fasting and through calling and pleading on the name of the Lord. And Pastor Jared's message today talked a lot about endurance and about persistence. And I don't think that just means persistently like yelling at each other or persistently reminding each other of our faults or anything. It means humbly, if you take it in context with the past few weeks, it means humbly pleading with the Lord that something supernatural would happen. Because as we all know, I think a lot of advice or requests falls on deaf ears if a person's not in a right spot with the Lord and with other people. It becomes nagging. It becomes all negative to the person, even if it's not all negative. It sounds negative because it's a heart issue. It's a spiritual issue deep down. So I think persistence in prayer and in pleading with the Lord for a spouse or a child, that a renewed context, a shared context of following Jesus would be the bedrock of our love.
Yeah.
It's got to be that. Otherwise, we don't share enough of those values to really see that progress. Doesn't mean you give up on the vow and the commitment. Just the opposite. I think you have to, as painful as it can be, plead and just beg at the door of heaven. Keep knocking. I think of the persistent widow. Pastor Corey and I were talking about this just a little bit ago. The persistent widow who in Luke 18, who just kept knocking and knocking and pleading with this magistrate. Jesus told this story about how we should plead persistently with God to make a waymaker, right? To do something miraculous. And I had a former pastor when I was interning as a youth with a youth team, and there was a student in that youth group who, for weeks and months and even years, every week, every get together, would pray for his father to come to know the Lord. Twice a week, 3 times a week, when we would gather. And this youth pastor of mine was preaching one Sunday, and right in front of everybody, he said, "I got to admit, I started to get sick of hearing, after years, this kid just pray for his father to take a break, man. I mean, God's got it in his timing, but and yet he paused and he said, I wish I had half the faith that this kid had. And he then had the kid dad stand up in the middle of the congregation of the church because the dad had accepted the Lord and was an elder of that church, a year later after accepting the Lord. And the kid's faith, his persistent, unwavering faith, even when a pastor was kind of getting tired of hearing the kid pray, man, I think ultimately the answer has to be a spiritual answer that we plead with the Lord to change hearts and change commitments and renew faith, so that then we can love together and share some of that context to work it out with. That's what I would say.
Yeah, no, that was great. I love that story. Yeah. That is like that resonates in like my pastor's heart in like such a deep place. But because at the same time, like I can look back on my time in ministry and see myself in that pastor's shoes. Like, well, sometimes you see and hear things, and it can be so disheartening to keep on praying, but yet that is the call, right? Yet that is the enduring love of Christ moves us towards that. And And so it is a challenge, but it's I always think about the passage of scripture, never stop praying.
Right.
And for moments of these, I think never stop praying, but don't you dare pray alone,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
build some community into that, because there are moments where praying alone just feels like the most overwhelming thing, the most disheartening thing. So in those moments, it's like, then you'd mentioned it earlier, right? Then you have a community, then you have people of faith to stand with you, to encourage you together. And I think that's how you make it through.
Yeah, and the verses that ever since this series started, the verses that every week come up in my mind are Hebrews 12, 1-3, that says, throw off hindrances and sins that entangle, run the race with perseverance, fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. And then he says, the author says, consider him who endured such opposition so that you won't lose faith. And I think, man, what lengths did Jesus go to save me? How much of an enemy of God was I? How much of a hypocrite was I? How much of a broken person was I? And Jesus went all the way to the cross through death, to rescue me, to rescue you. And man, I think if we lose sight of that, we start to feel sorry for ourselves, or we start to lose hope. We start to think, how many times should I forgive my brother? Like maybe 7, maybe. And then Jesus, like 70 times 7, or just 700, 7,000.
Yeah.
And Jared rightly said, you're never going to get there unless a miraculous thing happens in your heart. You consider Jesus and what he did. You will never love or forgive or persist that way unless something supernatural happens, something bigger than just grinding it out yourself. You have to have the love of Christ, the life, the death, the resurrection of Christ. That has to be transformative in your life if you're going to do this. You're going to,
spot on. The grind it out on your own. Even I think about how often we try to endure and persist on our own strength, and just, man, you talk about a recipe for depletion in the fastest possible way. That's it. Even I would say, even throughout this quarantine and some of the circumstances that we're all enduring, trying to run through those and trying to get through all of this unknown and different stuff alone or on your own strength. Man, you probably went nuts week 1. And and we probably all had moments. So I think there's a lot of there's just a lot of opportunity for growth and grace at the same time for yourselves, and for your team. And for your team, lots of grace for your team. We got another question here, and then we'll probably wrap up. We got about 4 minutes left. Just wanted to say thanks also to everybody in the chat. Looks like everybody is responding and showing some love. Jody, I see a lot of names in there of people I miss seeing your faces. But it's been cool to kind of get to chat through this. But last question is from Steven. And it's, what are some practical ways to get better at believing the best no matter what?
Practical is always good. It's easy to talk in theory. Practical ways. So again, I mean, I think we got to figure out what context we're talking about. But if we're talking about family, and I want to stick with practical ways. So, I mean, with a spouse, I think there's a reason you fell in love. There's a reason the person caught your eye. There were hopes and dreams. Maybe they haven't been realized yet. Maybe there's been frustrations. But I think there's things you could, if you want to get really mushy, you could sit down on Mother's Day or something and write down a couple of things and talk to your spouse about things that inspire hope or help you believe the best, or say, I remember this. Can we go for this again? Can we pursue this again? Our first few years, we were kind of laser focused on this and this. And then I know how time and kids, I've got 3 kids of my own. And I know sometimes we can get sidetracked, or hopes and dreams that we had didn't work out or got delayed or something. And that could cause you to lose hope. But A, I would say those things could be rekindled. B, don't just think that because some things got sidelined and other things got put in place, that those new things are bad. I mean, they might be the new things that help you believe the best. And I know for me, like a lot of times a new circumstance, not just even in family, will show up. And because it was unexpected, I immediately think it's a bad thing.
Mm.
Like this took me away from what I was thinking I was going to do, right? My expectations. And I think believing the best involves deciding that what God has placed in your hands is what's best for you, even when it's not fun, let's say, or it's not what you had planned for. So I think there's a bit of a choice of faith involved to believe that what God has for you. Obviously, hard times or difficulties in themselves aren't good. They can be painful. But believing the best, I think, again, is not just optimism. It's faith that God will work things out for the best, or faith that God can even take, as Pastor Jared said towards the end, can take evil and turn it for good.
Yeah.
But as far as practical ways, like I might write some of those things out. I might have, as we said 15 minutes ago, having conversations, communication is so key. So sitting down and talking about those things, that's a practical thing for believing the best. But I know for me, I can just get trapped in my head. So
30 seconds left. We're about to, I don't want you to get cut off. We will, we'll probably have to dive more into that at some point in the next few weeks. But thanks so much, everybody, for staying tuned and chatting with us. Thank you, Pastor Jeff, for joining us. Just want to give a shout out. I see, Kathy, your comment about God moving mountains. I love seeing that. So thanks so much, everybody, and we will see you next week.
Thanks, guys.